Hi, my name is Steve Kruse. I'm a security architect with Stratascale. What we want to talk to you about today is a business case for FIDO tokens. We're using elements of fair risk assessment methodology for that business case. But before we dive into that, I just wanted to introduce myself. I've been doing cybersecurity since 1989, so a fair number of years. I also want to pass it over to the co-presenter, Joseph Karpenko. Joseph, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Steve. Glad to be here. My name is Joseph Karpenko. I'm the advisory CISO for Stratascale. I've been in the industry for 20 years in global consulting and technical leadership, helping companies, really deliver strategies and solutions on how to evaluate, monitor, and continuously improve their security programs and resilience. So thanks for having me.
So with that, let's dive into the business case for FIDO tokens. What we want to do is first cover a quick agenda slide. We're going to talk a little bit about the authentication landscape, some recent multi-factor authentication or MFA attacks, why FIDO is probably a better solution for authentication. And then as part of the business case, we're doing some risk quantification to depict maybe a risk reduction with the adoption of FIDO tokens. And so we'll step through the following on the bullet here. Joe, do you want to add anything to this slide?
Just the point of how the use of cyber risk quantification or CRQ can really help you justify and defend not only your investments, but also understanding your controls and the efficacy of those controls. So once we get into that, that's just one of the key things I'd like to point out is that it's effective use and how you can, not only justify costs, but also, the effectiveness.
So with that, let's talk. We're not going to spend a lot of time on passwords because we assume the audience is already focused on multi-factor authentication as opposed to passwords. But just to kind of highlight the fact that passwords in some respects might be considered fundamentally flawed is the fact that there's a lot of attacks using passwords, replay attacks, brute force attacks, and other attacks. One example would be that earlier this year, in March of 2022, CNBC had an article where they had a show where they talked about, well, gee, now your 8-character password can be cracked in under 8 hours, kind of thing, and that was based on this organization, Hive Systems, and how they had a table like the one depicted on the slide from prior years. It actually turns out that 8-hour figure has changed dramatically at this point in time. The newer table from Hive System is putting that figure for brute force attack on an 8-character password at 39 minutes. So it's quite dramatic, the effectiveness of the adversary or the hacker community to attack a system using either brute force or other techniques. Also, we're talking about multi-factor authentication. We're simplifying it into something you have and something you know. The presenters here, Joseph and myself, recognize that multi-factor authentication has a slightly more complex definition. Usually it's something you have, something you know, and something you are. But just for simplicity's sake, we're just kind of focusing on the something you have and something you know. Joseph, anything else to add on this one?
Just the fact that, as computing continues to, evolve and innovate, and the ability for, cracking and hacking tools to become, more effective, we've seen within a couple of years that there's been a 92% decrease, going from 8 hours to 39 minutes, or right at 40 minutes. So that it's, as passwords, yes, get longer, they're more complex. We know they're a pain and for us to remember to use, and so I think the point here is that, just passwords are a challenge and they really need to go away.
Yeah. So the other issue, we can kind of put multi-factor authentication mechanisms into maybe 3 camps. There's those kinds of things that are using, say, one-time passwords and some of the multi-factor authentication devices that we've used for going on 30 years now. There's some interesting solutions, but for the most part, some of the newer solutions might be proprietary. So at some level, we might be taking it on vendor faith, whether there's robust security in those systems or not. And then we have published standards like FIDO and FIDO2, which are very transparent in how they do security and the underlying mechanisms, so that the crypto analysts of the world can review these protocols and either attest that they do seem fairly robust, or that there might be some issues with the protocols. So historically, it's been kind of agreed that public preview is a good way to ensure that cryptography and the cryptography behind things like authentication is indeed robust. Joe, I think you wanted to talk about some of the recent attacks on multi-factor authentication. So why don't I hand it to you?
But in adding to what you just mentioned, just the fact of the open standards, where I think that's very important for us as companies to look adopting those open standards, because then we don't get vendor lock-in for proprietary type of software solutions or products that they have. So I think that Steve, what you just mentioned on the open standards is an important note. In regards to recent attacks, what we continue to see is with Cisco and Uber and even the University of Arkansas, through phishing attacks, and it really has come down to identity and authentication is really becoming the new battleground. Where we're able to compromise accounts and credentials, but then we're able to just send push notifications or text messages and continue to bombard the end users who are accessing these sensitive resources and assets. And we're going to continue to do it until they say yes. And that's exactly what's happened here, is that, with Uber and Cisco and the University of Arkansas, we had the bad actor that would just continue to send, messages. And it was, I'm going to click yes to approve access to this asset. So, we're seeing a shift definitely in the way that the bad actors are behaving, in the way that they're targeting users. And the adversaries are just going to become more and more sophisticated. So, looking at adopting FIDO2, and the open standards, and how you can more directly and strictly tie authentication to URLs and domains and other resources and assets is going to be very important. And not only that, but we're able to remove, the reliance and dependency on a password that someone does not need to know now at this point.
Yeah, and this kind of bombardment of, say, a cell phone with requests for verification or something. So the industry's kind of termed that something like MFA bombing or MFA fatigue. So that's the label we used over on the left side of the slide. So when we look at things like FIDO2 for efficacy, this isn't just supported by us as an organization. It turns out that the Center for Internet Security, that the federal government, and other sources all talk about the strength of multi-factor authentication, and beyond that, some phishing resistance, phishing protections, which again, the FIDO and the underlying protocols support. It turns out some of the industry heavyweights like Apple, Google, and Microsoft have all gotten on board the FIDO bandwagon and are promoting FIDO as a standard. Let me again pass it to you, Joseph, and you could maybe talk about that a little bit more, or about the cyber insurance kind of play around multi-factor authentication.
Yeah, absolutely. So in various recent conversations, I actually had a conversation just a couple of weeks ago with the CISO that was about to leave to go actually get or renew their underwriting and their policy. But what we're seeing with the cyber insurance providers is that they are now becoming more diligent in understanding the type of controls that exist within their clients' environment, and one of those specifically is MFA. Now, MFA is fantastic, but as we just mentioned, there are constant, continuous, and new and evolving attacks on it. But with FIDO, not only do we have MFA, but we're able to strengthen and improve the resistance of that control within our environment. So as part of insurance underwriting, we will continue to see MFA as a control, and that may even evolve into more strict controls themselves. and we will see that as mandatory going forward. So if you don't have it, which I know that Microsoft did a study last year, and only approximately 20-ish% of enterprise organizations had actually adopted MFA as part of their Azure AD. So it definitely has a lot of room for growth and how we can actually get this implemented so we can improve our cybersecurity posture.
Yeah. The table is simply a table from the NIST 863 special publication, just talking about the proper kinds of and more secure kinds of authentication mechanisms. And the FIDO 2 would certainly fall kind of down in those bottom two rows, the multi-factor and the multi-factor with perhaps additional proofing or some other features like some biometrics. So what we've talked about very briefly was a little bit covered over on this left side column, this control efficacy. The fact that passwords in some MFA solutions, there might be some issues with that. And so, the encouragement would be to maybe look at things like phish-resistant tokens, like FIDO2 types of solutions. What we want to focus in on now in the next couple of slides is how, with that kind of improved effectiveness or improved efficacy, how we could kind of translate that to a risk analysis, a quantitative risk analysis, to understand, well, okay, gee, if we have a more effective authentication mechanism, how does that translate into our risk posture? Joe, anything else you want to discuss on this?
No, you nailed it.
Okay, so let's bump to the next slide. So what we use is a well-known kind of formula for risk. Risk as the product of likelihood and impact. And the likelihood is really a function of the threats, the threat actors, the vulnerabilities, the exposure, the security controls, and the compensating controls we have in place. And the impact, would certainly be a function of how critical is the asset to our environment, the targeted asset to our environment. So what we're going to use, I'm going to jump to the next slide, Joe, unless you want to add to this.
To me, I think one of the most important pieces, as mentioned earlier, with the cyber risk quantification is just being able to tie cost to it and associate that cost, to the impact, and also understanding, what is the reduction of cost, based on the implementation of those controls and even the supporting and complementary compensating controls. So this gives you the ability to be able to justify costs as well as implementation, gain budget, for different types of controls that you're looking to implement within your environment.
And so for our sample analysis here, what we've picked is a semiconductor supplier with 1,000 users or 1,000 employees. The adverse event would be a data breach, and the asset in question is intellectual property for this semiconductor supplier. The external threat actor would be a sophisticated actor and potentially a ransomware element as well. What we've done is we've taken some numbers that all the stakeholders had agreed upon and used those for our simple risk assessment here. So in this case, we're estimating that a public attack like this could occur maybe 3 times over the course of 10 years. So maybe once every 3.3 years. And the impact is based in part on IBM's recent publication about data breach as an average cost there. I think the IBM figure is about 4.35 M. We just simplified that and called it $4.5 million as a potential impact or potential cost if that breach occurred in this organization. Joe, anything I missed there?
No, I think everything summed up quite nicely.
Okay, good. Let me bump to the next slide then. And so what we've done for further analysis, although we've already got these assumptions like likelihood and impact, we could actually use a tool like FAIR, which stands for Factor Analysis of Information Risk, to kind of dive a little bit deeper. So if I look at this top of this hierarchy here, risk, right underneath that, there's 2 other rectangles, this loss event frequency, and really that's the FAIR terminology for likelihood. and loss magnitude on the right side of the slide. And really that's the FAIR terminology for impact. So really I could substitute, likelihood and impact for those. But if I wanted to kind of decompose that, well, gee, what makes up likelihood? Then, we could say, well, that depends on how many times a threat actor is knocking at our door, or threat event frequency, and how vulnerable our systems are or vulnerability. So we can kind of step down through this hierarchy or this upside down tree to analyze a little bit further those elements that we want to analyze. Joe, anything to add on this one?
Yeah, I would say that, FAIR gives us a framework to, justify, through quantification that it's an open standard, which I think is important. And the other part is that with the scope itself is that it allows you to fully understand, what's the cost, what's the impact, what may be a high minimum or average, in regards to an incident or event based on the controls that I have in place. So just the fact that, we have an open standard available to us that can be used to help justify and defend, whenever we're actually talking about, budget, or implementation, of new controls and technology within our environments. So it is a defensible solution that can be used for you.
Yeah. So let's use the same picture here, and we're going to kind of zero in on a couple of these elements here. So what we're really focused on is the improved control ability, or what in the FAIR terminology is called resistance strength, of our environment. And if I have an improved resistance strength, that should lower the vulnerability, which in turn should lower the likelihood. And so really that's kind of how our math is working in this case study. So what we're saying is, okay, well, a generic kind of multi-factor authentication solution might provide about 80% effectiveness. And we're going to claim that a FIDO 2 authentication solution might improve that resistance strength or that control effectiveness from 80% up to 90%. So a 10% improvement. We think this is very defensible because of the FIDO 2 protections and anti-phishing or phishing resistance kinds of protections, as well as historically a lot of organizations that have adopted FIDO 2 solutions have claimed little or no phish attacks since their adoption. Joe, anything else on this?
Just to add a couple of things. One is that with the adoption, it has actually been 99.9% effective. And I think that's important to note in regards to interviews with clients and companies and users that have adopted the use of FIDO 2. But the other fact is that this is a bottom up or trickle up impact in regards to, by improving the resistance strength, you then reduce the likelihood of a vulnerability. Once you reduce the likelihood of vulnerability, you reduce the likelihood of the event itself. And then that in the end impacts the overall risk. So you start at the top by defining your risk. What is the frequency or the loss, or frequency being likelihood or loss being the impact. And so you start from the top and boil all the way down, but then that feeds back up to give you the overall picture and how you can help more effectively manage risk for your business.
Yeah. So if we look at, say, quantifying this, I know it's a little bit of a busy slide and I apologize for it, but we can run the numbers fairly easily. So if we focus first on the left column, we talk about, well, gee, if we think there might be 3 breaches in about a decade or every 10 years, that equates to maybe a single breach every 3.3 years. But if we multiply those 3 breaches by our impact estimate of $4.5 million, well, then we think that there's potentially a risk or a cost there of about 13.5 million over the course of a decade. Now, if we divide that by 10 to get what's called an annualized loss exposure, then we've got this exposure of about 1.35 M per year. And that's what we're looking at is our kind of before picture. And so what happens is that once we improve the resistance strength, and using some of the publicly available FAIR calculators, that improved resistance strength actually improves overall, say, strength, not by that 10%, but a slightly lower figure, in this case 8%, based on the calculator we used. And so now, instead of having this likelihood of 3 times or 3 breaches over the course of the decade, that changes it to about 2.76, two plus events per decade. And so now my per decade cost drops from 1.35 M to 12.4 M over the course of a decade. And so if we run that out or simply divide it by 10, I'm now looking at the rightmost column, we see that, okay, well, now instead of a annualized loss exposure of 1.35 M, we're looking at an annualized loss exposure of 1.24 M, the difference about $110,000. I think I took up all the talking time there, Joe, but if you want to add something, I'd love to hear it.
You explained it quite thoroughly and quite succinctly. I mean, just the fact that, we're actually able to reduce, our overall ALE by 110,000 per year. I mean, if we just look at that in 3 years, that's $330,000 in cost savings. So by utilizing FAIR, that gives us the ability to understand, okay, I've saved $330,000. How could I utilize this as, getting budget, being able to maybe even adjust how I, allocate my budget for other controls. So it gives you the ability to only get the budget, understand what those controls, how effective they are, and how they, again, help to improve, our security posture and more effectively manage that risk.
Yeah. And there's a lot of, say, subtleties and nuances here. We're really talking about public breach, and that's why there's the high impact cost. We've done analysis with, say, private breaches with a greater level of frequency. Typically, these are kind of order of magnitude types of changes. So some of the studies suggest that organizations are getting hit by some kind of level of breaches at, some 30 times or 40 times a year. But because these are non-public events, they're significantly lower impact events. But still, obviously, there's a cost there. If you have questions or want to use different assumptions instead of the assumptions we used, we could help step you through that if you want, or you're welcome to go out and do it on your own. These tools that we're using are all publicly available. But beyond the risks,
and I was just gonna add that I would say we're usually utilizing a moderate, very average number with the 4.5 million for a breach itself. If you look at just the U.S. alone, the average cost is $9 to $10 million, and within the industries, healthcare is getting hit hard. They are the most impacted as regards to cost and impact. And I believe if I recall correctly, Tenet Health, they just had $100 million incident. So this is a very, what I would consider a very moderate number in regards to an incident and a data breach.
Yeah. But beyond the risk savings or the risk reduction, we can look at other benefits too. So in this case, we're looking at a reduced login time, or the point that FIDO 2 tokens, reduces friction and really is the great first step or great step on the road to passwordless kind of things. And so in this case, we've used a couple of simple formula. We say that, over the course of a year, this saves roughly about 2 hours per user per year. If we had 1,000 users and their annual salary is about $60 an hour on average, that equates to about $120,000 savings or improvement in time savings for our users, our employees. Further, if we wanted to look at the potential help desk savings, we could look at, say, password resets. And in this case, I think the figure for the help desk staff is roughly $34, and we're saying, okay, about 25% of that. If it takes 15 minutes to do a password reset, that's where this 8.5 or $8.50 figure comes in the lower table. But if we take those as good assumptions or good numbers, then we get a help desk savings cost of a little over $63,000. Joe, anything I missed there, or anything that needs clarification?
Just the fact that if we're reducing this by 75%, so I mean in total we're talking about $85,000 annually that cost us for our help desk to actually reset passwords, but with a 75% reduction, through the use, of FIDO2 tokens, that's a $63.7 thousand savings. So just the point that, we are going from, $85,000, and we're actually saving 63.7, thousand of that. That's quite a significant amount. I mean, you're looking right at, 20K then at that point, that's only costing you annually at that point. And not only that, but, once you get, year to year to year, that will actually, increase higher. So, that can go from 75, to up to 85, up to 95%. So that can increase significantly in your savings.
Yeah. And conversely, if you think some of these estimates are maybe too aggressive, like you'd estimate, say, a 50% reduction or a 25% reduction, no problem. We can still run those numbers. There's still a benefit there. Obviously, it's on the smaller figure, but there still certainly is a benefit there. There's other kind of soft or non-quantified kind of benefits as well. So the fact is that now our users with FIDO2 tokens don't have login fatigue, and it reduces their burden, their credential management burden, meaning numbers of user IDs and passwords. So other benefits to FIDO2 adoption. And so really, if we summarize, this is the summary slide here, we look at FIDO as a very, sound solution, and it's not just us, right? The major industry players are also backing FIDO, and every year it seems to get some momentum. The risk analysis we've done, again, you can use your own numbers. You don't have to use the numbers we provided. And if you wanted help, we're happy to help you with that. And finally, the labor savings that are depicted over here on the right side, between the faster logins and the help desk savings, that comes out to about 183K, a little over that. The risk reduction, we estimated at about 110K per year. So the total, yearly benefits are a little bit under 300K. Joe, did I miss something there, or something else you want to add?
No. Just say, to wrap it up, I mean, the point of, the adoption and use of FIDO2, is really to help, strengthen, our security posture, reduce our risk exposure. We looked at, with these incidents, we can reduce the number of incidents, so we can improve reputation, and even customer loyalty at that same time. So, we have a bunch of different areas in regards to benefits that, we gain with the adoption. So not with just the security, not just with the reputation, but, support cost savings with the help desk. So, and one of the other things that, I like about it is the fact that I don't have to deal with the damn password. I have, right now, I have over 130 passwords and accounts that I have. And so I think that, by utilizing a solution where I'm able to remove a reliance and dependence on passwords and something that I don't really have to know. And not only that, but it helps with, phishing resistance, and also, any type of account takeover, or if I've actually lost my credentials, and they are sold on the dark web, someone attempts to compromise it, it's going to be extremely difficult. As we've seen in many cases, it's 99%, effective in preventing that type of situation. So many benefits all around.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've oversimplified the business case a bit here, simply because of time. But again, if you want more details or you want to dive into anything, we're not claiming, of course, that FIDO tokens are a panacea. Because of the sophistication of the newer tokens available, specifically FIDO tokens on the market. In some respects, we see some of the more successful companies take a use case approach and really look at this almost as part of a privileged account management, or PAM solution, in terms of, well, gee, what use cases would fit for FIDO2 tokens? Where could we improve authentication for other use cases where maybe a FIDO2 token, it would be difficult or impossible? But we could get into the gory details with you if you wanted to. I'm going to move
I would just add to that, Steve, is that, really, identity and data, the new battleground. I mean, the cyber warfare is, really primarily about getting access to data, but to get access to data, that requires, authentication and authorization. And the initial step to get access to that data goes through authentication. So I think that's an important part here, is that, FIDO helps strengthen, the access from an authentication perspective by strict controls around which user with a FIDO token can access what resources. So to me, we're looking at identities are always the access and method to get to the data, and that is what the bad actors are after.
Yeah. So just if you did have more questions or wanted more information or wanted to challenge us or correct us on some of our assumptions, by all means, contact us. It's hard to see, but there's an underscore between our first and last names. That's the email standard that we use at Stratascale. So it would be Joseph_Karpenko or Steve_Kruse at stratascale.com if you wanted to reach out and talk to us about this business case or any other issues you may be having or may want to talk about. I want to thank you for your time today, and we really appreciate you as the audience and you as the prospects and customers. Joe, closing thoughts?
Yeah. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me, and appreciate the FIDO Alliance for allowing us to come in and talk with you today.
Thank you.